What if the monsters you thought were invading Earth were actually the original inhabitants of it? And what if these terrifying creatures from the last house aren't aliens at all, but ancient beings that have been hiding beneath our oceans for longer than humanity has even existed? And here's where things get even crazier. What if their design is connected to one of the most famous cosmic monsters ever created, Cthulhu? Welcome back to your nerdy show. I'm your host, Spoiler Master. Today, we're diving deep into the creatures of the last house, where they came from, how their strange biology might work, what abilities they possess, what they actually wanted from humanity, and of course, the big question: are these creatures really descendants of Cthulhu? There are some fascinating clues hidden throughout the movie, so let's get into it. And just a quick warning before we begin, this video contains major spoilers for the last house. Where did the creatures come from? For most of the movie, the creatures are deliberately kept mysterious. We don't get a scientific explanation, we don't get some secret government file telling us exactly what they are, and nobody suddenly appears with a creature encyclopedia to explain everything. Instead, the movie gives us small clues, and one of the biggest clues comes right at the beginning. The film opens with a quote attributed to Arthur C. Clarke. How inappropriate to call this planet Earth when it's clearly an ocean. At first, that might sound like nothing more than a cool quote to establish the atmosphere. But after everything we learn later, it becomes incredibly important. Because where do these creatures come from? The ocean, and not just the shallow waters humans have explored. The implication is that these beings come from the deepest and most mysterious parts of Earth's oceans, places humanity knows remarkably little about. There's another clue when Ruth comes into contact with the strange substance produced by the creatures and recognizes it as salt water. Suddenly, the pieces start coming together. These aren't extraterrestrials arriving from another galaxy. They're creatures from our own planet, just from a part of it that humanity barely understands. And honestly, that's one of the most interesting ideas in the entire movie. We tend to think of Earth as something humans have already conquered and understood. We have cities everywhere, satellites in space, submarines exploring the oceans, and technology that can reach places previous generations could never imagine. But the deep ocean is still incredibly mysterious. So the movie takes that real-world uncertainty and turns it into horror. What if something intelligent had been living down there the entire time? Something that didn't need to interact with us because we never posed a serious threat to it, until humanity started changing its environment. Were they here before humanity? This is where things get even more interesting, because the movie strongly suggests that these creatures may be far older than humans. The director's explanation makes their history especially clear. These beings existed on Earth long before humanity did. So technically, we're not watching an alien invasion. We're watching another species reclaiming its environment. Think about it like this. Imagine someone walks into your house, starts tearing down the walls, destroys your furniture, floods your rooms, and then gets angry when you come back and try to reclaim it. From that person's perspective, you're the intruder. That's basically the perspective the last house gives these creatures. Humans have polluted the oceans, raised global temperatures, destroyed habitats, hunted countless species, and consumed natural resources at an incredible rate. The creatures seem to emerge when the planet reaches a point where they can no longer ignore what humanity is doing. So their arrival isn't random. It's a response. And that leads to one of the movie's biggest twists. We think we're watching an invasion movie, but we're actually watching the consequences of humanity invading someone else's world. What do the creatures actually want? Now, this is where I think the creatures become much more interesting than a typical movie monster, because their goal doesn't seem to be simple domination. They aren't trying to build an empire, enslave humanity, or sit on a throne and declare themselves rulers of Earth. Their objective appears to be something much closer to a reset. The endless rain, the flooding, the sealed houses, and the collapse of normal human life all contribute to one massive environmental change. Human activity slows down, and the natural world begins recovering. Grass grows, wildlife returns, habitats start regenerating, the planet gets a chance to breathe. And notice what happens to the Delgado family during those 5 years. Their house becomes almost like a miniature version of the world outside. They stop relying on supermarkets and start growing their own food. They collect water. They reuse materials. They learn to survive with fewer resources. In other words, they're forced to adapt to the kind of limitations humanity normally tries to escape. There's even an interesting parallel with Graham's fish tank. The family is trapped behind walls while being able to see the outside world, almost like fish inside an aquarium. And that makes you wonder, Is this punishment, or is it a lesson? Maybe the creatures are deliberately showing humans what it's like to be powerless. For thousands of years, humans have decided which animals live, which animals die, which habitats get destroyed, and which species are allowed to survive. Now the situation is reversed. Suddenly, humans are the ones inside the enclosure. Are the creatures actually evil? This is probably the biggest misconception the movie wants us to overcome. At first, they absolutely look evil. They're huge, they're terrifying, they move in ways we can't understand, and they're capable of doing things humans simply can't defend against. But when you actually look at their behavior, they aren't randomly attacking everyone just because they enjoy killing. In fact, their actions often seem connected to how humans respond to them. Look at Susan, for example. She encounters the creatures and immediately responds with violence. She's frightened, she's armed, and she tries to kill them. The creatures respond aggressively. But later, Jason reaches a completely different conclusion. When he finally understands that Ruth may be right and lowers his weapon instead of attacking, the creatures stop treating him as a threat. That's a huge clue. They aren't necessarily looking for a fight, they're responding to one. And that's why the ending is so important. When Jason puts the weapon down, the creatures allow the family to leave. The rain eventually stops, the doors open, and the creatures disappear back into their environment. It's almost as if the family has passed the test. The creatures aren't asking humanity to destroy them or defeat them. They're asking humanity to understand them. The creatures' incredible abilities. Now let's talk about their anatomy and powers, because these things are seriously overpowered when you think about it. First, they're incredibly strong. Their physical size alone gives them a huge advantage over humans, but their strength appears to be far beyond anything a normal person could match. They can overpower people, move through structures, and survive environments that would be extremely dangerous for us. Their bodies also seem perfectly adapted to both water and land. They can breathe and move underwater with incredible speed, but they can also operate on land. That's a massive evolutionary advantage. Most aquatic animals can't simply walk onto land and become equally dangerous, but these creatures can. They're also extremely durable. Harpoons, fire, and physical attacks don't appear to cause lasting damage in the way you'd expect. Their bodies seem capable of recovering quickly, suggesting some kind of powerful regenerative ability, or perhaps simply an incredibly resilient biology. But physical strength is only the beginning. The really interesting abilities are the ones connected to their environment. Can they control the weather? One of the strangest abilities associated with the creatures is their apparent control over the environment itself. The rain is not just normal weather. It becomes an almost constant presence throughout the movie, and the creatures seem deeply connected to it. They can manipulate water, move through it with ease, and appear capable of influencing atmospheric conditions. At certain points, even the wind seems to respond to them. Objects and people can be pulled or dragged without the creatures physically touching them. So are they actually controlling the weather, or are we watching some kind of biological connection between these beings and the planet's water systems? The movie doesn't give us a scientific explanation, and honestly, I think that's intentional, because if these creatures have existed in Earth's oceans for thousands or even millions of years, perhaps their abilities aren't supernatural at all. Maybe they're simply so advanced that what looks like magic to humans is actually a natural ability we don't understand. And that's a really interesting possibility, because from the perspective of a primitive species, advanced technology can look exactly like magic. So perhaps we're not looking at gods controlling the weather. We're looking at an ancient species with an understanding of Earth systems that humanity hasn't even begun to comprehend. The salt-like substance. Then there's the bizarre liquid they produce. When this substance comes into contact with certain materials, it can leave behind a crystallized, salt-like residue. And that makes perfect sense when you consider where these creatures live. They're deeply connected to the ocean, so their bodies may naturally produce substances that help them survive in that environment. But the movie also uses this ability as a weapon. It can destroy or interfere with the food and resources the family depends on, making survival even more difficult. And then there's another ability that the movie only briefly hints at, the ellipsis symbol, what appears to be an ink-like substance. If you've ever seen an octopus or squid release ink, you can immediately see where that idea comes from. And if the creatures are designed around aquatic life, it would make sense for them to have defensive or offensive mechanisms inspired by creatures that already exist in our oceans. Then we have perhaps their strangest ability of all, their power to seal the doors and windows of the houses. The family tries drilling through walls and creating openings, but the invisible barrier seems to respond almost instantly, closing the gaps again. It's as though the creatures can manipulate matter or create some kind of force field around human structures. Whether that comes from their biology, the water itself, or some connection to the planet, the movie intentionally leaves it unexplained. Why do they look like Cthulhu? And now we get to the question you've probably been waiting for. Are the creatures descendants of Cthulhu? Visually, the comparison is almost unavoidable. Cthulhu is famously depicted as a gigantic humanoid creature with an octopus-like head, tentacles, a massive body, and an otherworldly appearance. The creatures in the last house also have tentacles, aquatic features, huge bodies, and that unmistakable Lovecraftian silhouette. So it's easy to look at them and think, okay, these have to be Cthulhu's relatives. But here's the problem. There is no confirmed connection between the creatures and Cthulhu in the movie's actual mythology. In Lovecraft stories, Cthulhu is an extraterrestrial cosmic entity associated with the Great Old Ones. He isn't simply an ancient animal that evolved in Earth's oceans. He's something much stranger and far more cosmic. And that doesn't really fit the central idea of The Last House. The movie's creatures are specifically supposed to represent ancient life from Earth itself. Their importance comes from the idea that humans aren't the only inhabitants of this planet. So, are they literally descendants of Cthulhu? Probably not. But are they inspired by Cthulhu? Oh, absolutely. Why the Cthulhu comparison still matters. The resemblance isn't necessarily about creating a shared universe. It's about visual language. Cthulhu has become one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient, unknowable, oceanic horror. You see tentacles, a squid-like face, gigantic proportions, and suddenly your brain connects the dots. But The Last House changes the meaning. Lovecraftian monsters often represent humanity's insignificance in a vast and uncaring universe. Here, the creatures represent something slightly different, humanity's insignificance on its own planet. And honestly, I think that's even more disturbing. We don't need aliens from another galaxy to remind us that we're not the most powerful species. Something could already be living beneath our feet. Something that doesn't care about our cities. Something that doesn't care about our technology. Something that has been here longer than we have. And when humanity finally pushes the environment too far, that species might decide it's time to come back. So while I don't think these creatures are secretly Cthulhu's children, the filmmakers are clearly tapping into the same kind of primal fear. The fear of discovering that something ancient has been watching from the darkness, and humanity was never as important as it thought it was. Our nerdy thoughts. So, what are the creatures in The Last House? They're ancient ocean-dwelling beings, apparently native to Earth and possibly existing long before humanity. They're incredibly strong, highly durable, adapted to both water and land, and seemingly connected to the planet's water and weather systems. But their most important ability isn't strength. It's the ability to force humanity to look at itself. As for the Cthulhu theory, I wouldn't call them literal descendants of Cthulhu. There's no confirmation of that, and the movie's mythology points in a different direction. But the visual inspiration is obvious, and the comparison works beautifully because both concepts revolve around ancient, terrifying beings connected to the ocean and far beyond humanity's understanding. And maybe that's the biggest horror of The Last House. The creatures didn't come from another planet. They didn't need to. They were already here. We just never bothered to look deep enough. And after everything humanity has done to the planet, maybe the real question isn't, why did these creatures attack us? Maybe it's, why did they wait so long? If you enjoyed this The Last House Creatures Origin and Anatomy Explained video, let me know your theory in the comments. Do you think these creatures were inspired by Cthulhu, or do you think the movie is deliberately creating its own mythology? And if you enjoyed the breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe for more movie endings, creature origins, theories, and hidden details. And I'll see you in the next one.
No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.